Having former Suffolk County Police Commissioner Richard Dormer with me here today. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay, we just want to brief on where we are up to this part 4 in the series on the Gilgo Beach killings. So, Commissioner, could you brief us on what we covered in parts 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, I think it's important that maybe at this point that we recap, what's transpired up to this point. On May 1st, 2010, a prostitute named Shannon Gilbert went missing at Oak Beach. That's in Babylon Township off Ocean Parkway. Early in the morning of May 1st, she ran away from the client's home and disappeared. Subsequent searches by the Suffolk County Police Department, detectives, and canine units failed to reveal her whereabouts. It was presumed that she was DOA at that particular time. Over the next few months, K9 with the detectives would respond to Oak Beach, continuing the search in that rugged terrain without success. In December of 11th, the same year, 2010, the K9 officer crossed over Ocean Parkway and headed west towards Gilgo Beach when he came upon remains wrapped on the surface near Gilgo Beach. Everybody assumed at that point that it was Shannon Gilbert. Subsequent investigation indicated it wasn't Shannon. The search continued 2 days later with K9 and the detectives, and 3 more remains were found. This was a total. And these remains were identified as these 4 prostitutes that had gone missing. And they were identified from DNA. Now, it was decided that because of the winter months, this was December that they were found, and the winter had settled in. It was very difficult terrain for the K9 officers and detectives to search. So it was decided to go back in the spring, which we did, when the snow and ice was gone. The foliage hadn't grown yet. And so March 29th, another remains was found. And then on April 4th, 3 more remains. Now we have a total of 8 remains. These 4 plus 4 more. You can imagine, and I'm sure your audience can imagine, that this now was a major investigation. Worldwide media coverage, not just locally, but worldwide.
And can I just stop you there for a second, Commissioner? You talk about worldwide. What other agencies were in on the investigation?
Well, when these 4 were found, we were involved with the FBI, the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, NYPD, State Police, Nassau County PD, and local police departments throughout New York. I mean, this was not just a Suffolk County investigation. As you can imagine, and your investigators out there, your law enforcement people understand that you have to draw all the agencies, law enforcement agencies, into the investigation, because this, we found out, crossed over boundaries. New York City was involved, Nassau County, because subsequently 2 body parts or remains were found in Nassau County. So now, it wasn't just Suffolk County. So it was a very comprehensive, intensive investigation.
And you talk about other agencies getting involved, Commissioner, and I think now is a good time to ask the audience. A lot of crimes are solved with public assistance, either retired, and I know a retired Nassau detective was involved, or in correlating the legs that were found in one location to somewhere else.
Well, if I could, Pete, that was one of our retired detectives. Mm-hmm. When he read in the newspaper that some of the bodies were dismembered, and he remembered a case that he handled way back in 1996, where 2 female legs were found in a bag off Davis Park, floating in the water. He called homicide and said, look, I handled this case, check with the medical examiner's office. They may have the legs there, which they did. They still retained the legs in the freezer. Sure. Yeah. Checked the DNA, and the DNA matched up with one of the body parts found near Gilgo Beach. This was from '96, so that was 14 years. And now it's connected to Gilgo Beach.
And I guess that's what I'm saying. It was a peripheral tip that helped move the investigation forward. And at this point, I think that's what one of the purposes of the show is, to continue to help solve these crimes and ask the audience out there for any other peripheral tips, anything that may seem insignificant that may correlate to something. And I'll remind that the son of Sam was caught by virtue of a parking ticket that was issued, and many other crimes are solved by simple things just like that. So you
and I should, again, your audience probably knows this. This guy, and we believe it's one killer, the probabilities are that it's one killer, slipped up somewhere. Mm-hmm. He made a mistake. Law enforcement has to find that mistake. So publicizing and continuing to publicize the investigation and the case could lead to a lead that could move this case forward.
Okay, Commissioner, you mentioned one killer. Is that your theory, or are there others that subscribe to that theory?
No, there are many experts in law enforcement that agree with me that it's probably one killer because of the common denominators involved. And I should mention, by the way, and Vernon Gerbert, retired lieutenant from New York City.
I'm familiar with him, yes.
Expert on homicides, wrote a book, a comprehensive book on homicide investigations. He agrees that it's one killer. And the common denominators, and I should mention some of them, and the experts, by the way, and the FBI says that there are 3 or more characteristics that would lead to one killer. All these people that we found are in the sex business. Pretty clear, because they're not, the ones that we found after these 4 are not in the database. All remains were dumped at Gilgo Beach or in the vicinity of Gilgo Beach. And that was the Manorville bodies that were found in 2000 and 2003. Parts of their bodies were found at Gilgo Beach. Craigslist, the social media where they advertised the sex business, that was involved in these 4 and probably in the others that we did not identify. Some of the bodies were dismembered. So dismemberment was part of the signature of the killer. The bodies were wrapped. I'm not going to say how they were wrapped, but again, that's the signature of the killer. The MO is luring the sex workers into his web, and then what happens after that is the signature of the killer. So I agree with Vernon and people in the FBI and other law enforcement professionals that it's probably one killer. You know, if we do identify a killer down the road and find out it's not one, so be it. But right now the indications are that it's one killer because of all these common denominators.
Got it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the investigation. How does technology come into play in an investigation like this?
Well, as you can imagine, this homicide investigation, or this murder investigations were different from what we would call a normal murder investigation. Most murders are personal. People know each other. There's a relationship between the victim and the killer. In these cases, there's no relationship. It's a one-time connection or, meeting.
Superficial relationship, yeah. Casual relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to, follow up, and especially if you haven't identified all the victims. It was critical that we identified these 4 victims, the first 4,
right.
And then we identified some of the other remains, one of the other remains that was found at Manorville. Mm-hmm. Jessica.
And jewelry came into play with that as well?
Well, that was a different one. The jewelry was never identified. The victim that was the toddler and the mom. They were never identified, and that's why we publicized the jewelry that was found on. And by the way, this was part of the investigation, was utilizing the media. This is the jewelry. On the top is the jewelry from the toddler. On the bottom is the jewelry from the mom. Similar jewelry. And detectives did an awful lot of investigative work trying to identify who manufactured this, where it was sold, with zero result, because it was very cheap, very common, and they didn't really move the case forward. But we were hoping that somebody out there would recognize this jewelry and call the Crime Stoppers number at Suffolk County, which is 1-800-220-TIPS. 1-800-220-TIPS. And if anybody in the audience has any information on this type of jewelry or can help with that, I'm sure that the detectives would love to hear from you.
Okay, and Commissioner, while we're showing some evidence.
You mentioned the technology, Pete. If I don't want to skip over that. You know, computers were involved, cell phones. This killer, by the way, was very careful in covering his tracks. He didn't use his own cell phone. He was very, very careful to do that. And we found out too that the servers, the social networks, these social agencies, they delete their information regularly, and so it's very difficult to retrieve. Some of these were years old, and so that information wasn't available. And I should also mention that when one of these sex workers puts an ad on Craigslist, they get hundreds of hits, which lead to other hits. So in the investigative field, to obtain that information, we have to subpoena the records. You know, we just can't go in and get somebody's cell phone records.
Not like the movies, Commissioner.
And no, it's not like, exactly, and I tell people that all the time. And your retired law enforcement out there will certainly be nodding their heads right now and saying, I had to wait months to get results of a subpoena so that I could move forward with the case. And during that time, by the way, you'll have the family and other people all over you. How come you're not solving this case? When really it's out of your hands. You're just waiting for other agencies to respond.
Okay, next I want to talk about the technology, I guess, used to create a profile of one of the victims. You found a male remain, and curious about how a male could get in, and it turns out that it appeared to be a transgender male. And tell us about how NYPD got involved and created the sketch.
Well, we work very closely, Suffolk County Medical Examiner's Office, our Homicide Task Force, with the Medical Examiner's Office in New York City. They did a great job. They were terrific. The forensic pathologist in the Medical Examiner's Office in New York City was outstanding. And from the skeletal remains of the Asian male, the artist, the expert, reproduced this picture of what this person would look like. We publicized this. This went out over the media, television, asking anybody if they had information. By the way, he wasn't in the database. No DNA in our database.
Well, you mentioned the database, Commissioner. Can you just explain for the layperson what the database is?
Well, the database, when somebody goes missing in a jurisdiction and the police are called in, the police will obtain DNA from the family members, either from the personal belongings of the missing person or from a family member. That will be uploaded into the national database. Now, if remains are found anywhere in the US and the DNA is uploaded into that database, it'll come back as a hit and the identification can be made. If you're not in that database, that means your family didn't report you missing. Sex workers are not reported missing, so it's not uncommon for sex workers to not be in the database. And so we believe he was dressed in women's clothes. He was in the sex business and was a victim of this killer. So therefore, putting his likeness out was one way of reaching out to the public to find out if anybody recognized this person and could help with the investigation. And that's why we're doing it again today. If somebody recognizes this person, certainly they can call that number that I mentioned before.
Okay. Commissioner, I'd just like to ask, I guess, your predictions on where the investigation will go from here.
Look, there were cold cases and warm cases. I always mention, and I've mentioned on this show, about the Baby Hope. NYPD investigation on the baby that was found dumped on the side of the highway. The detectives never gave up on that. Retired detective never gave up on it. I applaud these investigators, these guys and gals from NYPD that continue to follow up on this case. And especially on the anniversary of her, when she was located or found, they had a composite that they would distribute in New York City. And that's how they cracked this case. Eventually somebody talked. Somebody had information, and finally, after all these years, came forward and gave the detectives a lead, which led to the arrest of the Baby Hope killer. And so this is an example for, these serial killer cases. This guy has slipped up someplace. He's made a mistake. Somebody out there may know something about this guy, may be afraid to call the police, afraid to call the Crime Stoppers number. But now over time, maybe that fear has dissipated, and now they feel confident enough that they can make a call, and that would lead the task force, the Suffolk County Police Homicide Squad, to move this investigation on and bring this guy to justice, because that killed these, and it was 10 people that we've finally, 10 bodies that were found at Gilgo Beach, connected to Gilgo Beach. So this killer is still roaming out there. He may still be involved in killing. The experts tell us that they don't stop. They go through a cold
Choose another
period.
geographic region. Yep.
Yeah, and he's comfortable with New York, New York City, Suffolk County, Nassau County. We're assuming at this point that he's found a new dumping ground. The homicide detectives are following up with all the local police agencies on missing prostitutes. But again, we all know that not all of them are reported when they go missing, because nobody misses them.
Okay, so just to summarize on a profile, Commissioner, we're looking for a male. We're looking for somebody that has a fairly sophisticated knowledge of technology and computers. Somebody that has familiarity with the sex issue. Sex industry, somebody that has a familiarity with both New York City and Nassau or Suffolk areas, and somebody that has a behavioral problem that probably can't stop.
Yes.
Is there anything else that I've missed on the profile?
No, he gets off on killing prostitutes. This is a big thing. It's and I don't think he's going to stop. He blends in the community. When he's caught, people are going to say, "I can't believe it." I've heard that before. He doesn't go around with a sign on his forehead that says, "I'm a serial killer, mm-hmm. I'm a sociopath or a psychopath." No, he's a pillar of the community someplace. He may even be a family man. I would say he's in his 40s, white male, as you said, Pete. Pretty much anybody in the law enforcement profession could come up with the profile and be pretty accurate on this. Probably has a good vehicle. It doesn't break down because he's got to transport bodies and body parts in his vehicle. And so, again, he's out there. This is very chilling that you have a killer in our midst who's killed 10 people that we know of at this point. And we haven't brought him to justice yet. We're hoping that these shows will help move the investigation forward.
Commissioner, I'd like to thank you for being on the show today, and we'll finish up in subsequent series. And thanks for coming today on The View.
Thank you, Pete.
Get Arrow, get secure.